talked about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I want to look at, for a moment, I want to take a look at threats. And not necessarily talking about them in a SWOT analysis, but looking at threats in general. And when we talk about threats, we're looking essentially at risk. What risks do we have? And when we look at those risks, we have to kind of look at them in four different categories. And we take risks every day in firefighting. We know that. We've said, okay, we are in a risky business. Firefighters die on average at the rate of about 100 a year. So we are definitely, at risk of getting injured or dying on the job. But because we're professionals, we look at it and we say, what can we do to reduce those risks? And one of the ways to reduce the risks is to identify them. And if you know what risks there are, then you can know which ones to stand clear of or how to mitigate them without getting hurt. So it's important to look at the risks. And you have risks, we look at them, and this is a risk management matrix. You look at them based on frequency and severity. All right, so when we look at frequency and severity, you say, okay, something that happens with a matter of frequency, it could be either high frequency or it could be low frequency. Okay, and then you look at it and you say, well, something that happens with a high degree of risk, where in other words the outcome is really bad, okay, that's high risk. And then you have something that's low risk, whereas the outcome is not necessarily going to be that bad. Okay, when we look at it, when we say low risk, we have low risk, and then we have high risk. Okay, now something that has a low level of occurrence and a low risk to it is very minimal. Okay, the outcome is not going to be that bad. So we really don't have a lot of them. So we have limited risk here. When we look at the high potential for frequency, it happens all the time, but it's very low risk. We can mitigate that through training. All right, we know that it happens a lot, so we can practice and get better at it, and then we can reduce the chances of what does go wrong because it's low impact. We can reduce that out. So we're really not too concerned with that. We have limited liability and risk there as well. And we look at something that really happens on a high frequency, and there's a high chance of risk. And in this case, we do it a lot. So again, we have to look at that, and when you do something enough, you get practiced at it. And I don't want to say complacent, you get practiced at it, you become better at it. So the more frequently you do something, even though it's a high risk, the potential for something going bad happens, you still have a pretty good way of dealing with it, and you're able to basically handle a situation without getting seriously hurt. We'll say, for example, the bread and butter structure fire. Not to say that structure fires haven't taken lives, but we get good at that after a while. We know how to do it. If we follow the right rules and we do it the right way and we follow the accepted procedures and practices, we're going to have a fairly high result and low injury from that. So when we look at this, we go to it a lot, but there is high risk. Okay, so it's dangerous. And then you look at here, something that has a potential for a very negative outcome, very bad, and something that we don't do very often. So when you think about your low frequency, high risk, low frequency, high risk, okay, events, these are the ones that are going to cause you the most trouble. And if you've ever had an opportunity to see Gordon Graham do his lecture on low frequency, high risk incidents, it's entertaining, but it teaches you how to prepare for that. And the way that we prepare for this type of incident, okay, more than this one, or this one. The way we prepare for this one, the one that has the biggest potential to do us the biggest harm, is to train, okay, to train. And, I like to call it the what-if training. We train on the things that we do on a routine basis. Medical calls, we train on that all the time, as we're running on medical calls pretty frequently. About 80–90% of the call volume that we have has to deal with EMS. So, when it comes to medical stuff, we're pretty good. But if you take that same analogy and you look at it, When we go to those oddball medical calls, the ones that we don't see very much, you know, the calls that are way out there, you know, the diagnoses that really just kind of throw a hook at us, we don't do so well on those because we're not experienced. We don't have the global knowledge and how to deal with it. So, you know, fortunately, we may have a protocol book we can look up and find out what to do. But again, and not being able to identify it could definitely, you know, throw a hook at us. And, you know, then we're going to be behind the 8 ball because we're not going to be able to identify what protocol to use. So again, you know, those are the ones you don't see every day. Those are the ones that you really should be training on. Because the things that you're doing every day, starting IVs and you know, giving medicine or going to routine structure fires or car fires, things like that, things that you do every day, you should be pretty good at because you're doing them on a fairly consistent over and over basis. So when we look at these, the low frequency, high risk events, we need to start picking apart what can happen. And we call these in our area, you know, essentially our targets. These are our target hazards. The high potential for loss of life, okay, the high risk, high potential for loss of life. It's something that we don't generally go to on a daily basis, the low frequency aspect of it. All right, so we look at these target hazards and we identify them. Now, what is the role? Well, if you're the fire chief, you're going to set your committees to be on the lookout for these target hazards, and you're going to assign it to special operations, and they're going to identify and classify and pull the information that they need to be prepared for that. But at the company level, let's look at the company level aspect of it. How do we prepare for these? Well, pre-fire planning. We prepare for them pre-incident planning. And pre-fire planning is one thing. Pre-incident planning is a little different. Pre-fire planning is looking at the structure, identifying the components, knowing where the systems are, doing a walkthrough, identifying where the hazards are located, egress and ingress points, and look at the type of ventilation systems that might be available. And that's your pre-fire plan, pretty basic. All right, looking at what the occupancy is, getting the information, what's my fire flow available. But pre-incident planning is a little different. Pre-incident planning is looking at the potential of what could go wrong there. For example, pre-incident planning at a hospital. Well, we know hospitals have they have MRI equipment, they have oxygen, they may have ammonia, they may have other types of systems there. So we have to be aware of what potentials could go wrong. And then identify some of the things that can happen. Incident planning in terms of, well, what would happen if a terrorist attacked? What would happen if a fire broke out in this area? What would happen if, while they were transferring oxygen from a tractor trailer, it you know, somehow caused this to happen? So all those things are what you look at, and that's incident planning as opposed to necessarily pre-fire planning. Pre-fire planning is not taking and looking at plugging incident components in. Incident planning is looking at what would happen if we had a fire there and where would it be inside the building, especially a large building. For example, your tactics may be different if you have a fire in the kitchen at that hospital as opposed to possibly a fire in the laundry room where there might be other chemicals or other things, and it may be in close proximity to other parts of the hospital. So again, you have to look at the incident plan as identifying how you're going to perform as opposed to the pre-fire plan is just giving me general knowledge of that building, its layout, its components, where my fire protection systems are.